Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Chill Film Discussion. It's been, I think, 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks since we were
It's
last
about two
on.
weeks, yeah.
That was my side. I was out of town, but now I'm back in town, so we are back on track with a new movie. Today we discussed a film called Passengers. It's a 2016 American sci-fi romance film. It stars Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt as the main characters, where they are venturing from on a spaceship called the Avalon on a 120-year journey to a different planet, Homestead 2. Along the way, Jim's pod malfunctions, so he wakes up early, 90 years too early, and then he becomes lonely after a year, and then wakes up Jennifer Lawrence's pod. Yeah. So the film itself, I think, is visually and aesthetically beautiful. I do really like some of the scenes, the imagery, especially when they go out into space and see it, or when they're like next to a window and you see the space, the scene of space. I just think it was very out of this world, no pun intended. And yeah, I just the whole aesthetic, the ship itself looked very sleek. The sort of the not really I was gonna say iPads, but like the basically all the little gadgets they were using to interface with the ship, I thought was really cool. Um, it just felt very like sci-fi, and I appreciate that part. Um, with that being said, there are a lot of, I think, inconsistencies with the film in terms of like making it convenient for the plot. For instance, no failsafe for the hibernation pod. Oh, well, we've had so many journeys where this has never happened. We don't need a failsafe.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that makes so much sense. So I think that's one very big um, convenience for the plot sort of inconsistency. Another one, there's I think several others, but I think the biggest one is the ex machina in the form of Gus, who is a crew deck captain, I think.
Your deck
That's his name?
officer.
Deck officer, yes. He conveniently, since he's a deck officer, he has access to the entire ship with his little band. He wakes up, he finds out he has 612 disorders, and then dies, and then he's like, all right, here it is. Here's access to the entire ship. The ship's breaking down. You got to go fix it. Uh, very convenient to be able to have that happen. I guess it's just like, yeah, just very convenient.
It is.
I think overall, the I probably would have changed up the film quite a bit um, to make it more enticing, more interesting. I think the biggest thing would have been maybe changing. So right, we have the whole movie is in Jim's perspective. So he wakes up, we know he's like a good guy. He's lonely, and then he also opens up Aurora's pod
Right.
purposely, meaning that like, and he basically condemns her to death with him
Right.
because he's lonely. Which is morally like a, very gray. Actually, no, it's pretty just wrong.
Right.
But he's lonely, so it makes like it's understandable. But if the movie were from Aurora's perspective, she has no idea what's happening. You as the audience also don't know what's happening. It's more of a mystery. I feel like, do we trust Jim? Like, is he a good guy? He seems to be kind of creepy at times, kind of, I think win you over as a lover. But ultimately, it's more like it keeps you on your toes. Like, it
Yeah.
would have been like, do we trust him ultimately? And then the movie could have panned out the same way. Like, eventually, yes, we do discover that he did wake Aurora up, but like, he's ultimately a good guy because he's willing to sacrifice himself to save the rest of the passengers on the ship. I would have liked if Gus died a bit differently. Maybe we would have had more screen time with Gus to get to know him as a character, and instead of having 612 disorders, maybe have like 3 or 5 big ones. I don't know. And then he ends up dying, succumbing to his disorders. But at least we get to know him, so he's not like an ex machina.
Yeah.
Um, and then in the end, Jim does end up dying. Like I would have maybe changed that up. He does end up dying, um, because of his self-sacrifice. And Aurora's alone now. And then at the end of the movie, Aurora, after like maybe 1 or 2 years, she opens up someone else's pod because she's lonely,
cycle.
and it kind of like cycles. I think that movie would have been very interesting because, like one, the first half would have been interesting in the sense that like we don't know. It would keep us on our toes. We eventually figure out that Jim's a good guy, that we understand why he did it. He saved the ship. He gets a character redemption because he sacrificed himself.
Yeah.
But then it goes back to the fact that like it's not because Jim's bad that he opened the pod. It's because of like the fact the human nature, the fact that we're like social beings and we get lonely and we want company.
Right.
So ultimately, it just harkens back to the fact that like Jim was not a bad character, even though in the beginning we don't trust him.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's how I would have changed the story. It's a big change. Actually, there's a lot of big changes.
Big change, yeah.
But I do think like overall the acting. I think Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence did a great job with her acting. I think aesthetically it looks really good. I also want to give a shout out. I do like the bar in the Avalon. It reminds me of the Shining bar. And I think it might be based on the Shining bar. I don't know. I saw that on one of the trivia facts. But yeah. Anyway, that's sort of how I feel about the movie. Great acting, great visuals. The plot was too many inconsistencies to count that made the plot very convenient.
Yeah.
And I think I probably would have reformatted a lot of it. Anyway, Mr. Austin.
Yeah.
What are your marks?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think for the most part, but for me, I feel like the movie. I mean, it's your basic romantic drama, right? Especially, but it's just set into this in space, right? And there's a twist where he kind of forces the female lead to fall in love with him instead of having them. I mean, for him it's love at first sight, but for her, it's kind of like he's the only choice on board, right? So they have this forced interaction. But I think the story goes along. They meet, they fall in love. He reveals their secret. They have to patch it up and then save the day, right? So the story is there. I just think there's just problematic elements on how they meet and how the relationship continues on. But even if that is the case, it's not excusable, but understandable why he does the things that he did. I think you're right. Like having it from Aurora's perspective, it would make it more, captivating the movie, right? But it would, I feel like, change the way that the movie is portrayed, right? It's no longer romantic. I mean, it can start off romantic at first, right? But then it kind of devolves. It will almost evolve into almost like a thriller / horror, right? Because now you have a guy who may or may not be unhinged, right? Because you don't know his perspective, and you don't know what he's gonna do, right? And it's a woman who's dealing with someone who could be, seems to be creepily obsessed with her, right?
Yeah.
So it would definitely change, I think, the way that the movie is, the watching experience. It would definitely give people, I think, kind of, a fear for her Aurora's safety, and change that dynamic. But in the end, he could have, sacrificed himself and, show that, he's noble. He was just very lonely, and, what does loneliness do, right? And, having that ending, if she kind of, repeats the cycle, would have kind of hit home to that fact, like, would you have done the same, right? And, she probably would have, right? Or not probably would have, but it would have shown that she would have, if that ending would be true. I feel like, Gus's character, he comes and goes, as we say. He's a ex machina. I just think we just needed more time with him. More character moments. to develop his character to make his death more poignant and just to have more purpose, right? Because it's almost comedic the fact that he shows up, he's there to solve all their problems, give them access to everything, and then he just conveniently dies. So this way, the ending is just still the two main characters, right? He's not there to interrupt or give any kind of conflict, right? No love triangle, no nothing, right? He's there, he helps, he's out, right?
Yep.
I think with Gus, it just I also would have liked to see more empathy, which I think would have given me be more sympathetic to his character if he was more sympathetic to Aurora, because I feel like when Aurora brings up the issue, it's very understandable that she's upset and she wants someone to help her, right? But he kind of seems a bit flippant with her, like, oh yeah, this is the way it is, and we can't. And while it might be true that it's only the three of them, they can't really do too much about it, right? They need every hand on deck. At the same time, I feel like he could have been more empathetic with her, especially when she was shown to be very distraught, right? So I think it would have been more build up his character a little bit more, showing him to be more sympathetic, also a bit more believable, right? Like, oh yeah, there's somebody, it doesn't move on that issue too quickly, and also maybe helps him, or his, I don't want to say coaching, but his advice would give her maybe some solace that maybe it would make sense. And then if we were to revise the ending, it would have kind of like repeat his words, like, yeah, if you're drowning, you're lonely, what would you do? This is what hurt. So it would have tied a little bit more nicely, I think, if he had been more almost human, because it's almost like, yeah, he had a job, a duty, and I think it'd been better if he had been more sympathetic to that. But having Jim die at the end, if he were to die, I think it was almost expected, but at the same time, in this current version of the film, I'm glad that he didn't. I think it was good that he survived. But in another perspective, it probably would have seemed better for him to be more noble to self-sacrifice, and then that whole different alternate ending play out in the end. I think visually the movie was really great. Set up definitely good setting. That's very believable. I really love the music, the scoring of it. I think it kind of emphasized a lot of moments, and even the moments when like Aurora kind of found out that Jim was like not, or like was kind of hiding the truth. It almost it's kind of interesting because that whole music, the scoring, and even before it kind of hit the point, like, oh yeah, this is like a uncomfortable situation that she's in. It almost built into that horror kind of thriller kind of sense, right? Like now she's stuck with almost like a obsessed stalker, right? But I think the music itself was great. There's some points that I think also emphasized Jim's loneliness, which I really appreciate. So I really noticed the music a lot in this film. In the acting, though, I feel like both actors were great. I really liked Jennifer Lawrence's performance. Chris Pratt's, though, I mean, some parts, he was good, but there are other parts where I feel like his acting was a bit flat, because he has like this like stare, right? And I feel like sometimes his like, I guess the way that he was acting would have fit a lot better if it was from Aurora's perspective, because he has this like, almost like lonely, and it would have been better for that instead of his perspective. So sometimes it just seems almost monotonous and flat, and maybe that's the point. He lost all life, but at the same time, it would have been better. The way that he acted would have been better for that perspective than his current perspective, and then but his acting overall was pretty decent. But there's some points where I just felt like there was like no emotion, or just it was like it was an empty stare. I'm not too sure. That's what I felt. But overall, I feel like it's a decent film, but there are definitely problematic elements, and I feel like we've built up like a movie that could have been a lot, I don't want to say better, but almost a lot more engaging and interesting compared to the one that we've watched, right? There's a lot set up that could have been a lot of potential with what it could have been, but the one we got was all right.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think that makes sense. There were times when his stares were like, oh yeah, from her perspective would have been made more sense. Like if she was uncertain, or if the audience was kind of uncertain how to gauge his character. But and okay, let's do our rating. Let's kind of why don't you start, Mr. Austin?
Why don't I start? I'd probably rate this tough. I might give it. I might give it a 7. I think
Oh,
the
okay.
movie, it was watchable, right? The story and plot lines were there, and the characters, I think were great, right? Interacting. I think for me, it was just that the way that the relationship was started was
Hmm.
very icky, right? Just like yeah, he kind of opens it just for her, and he's kind of seems obsessed. That's the greatest, but I feel like this movie is still watchable. Because they
Hmm.
have great chemistry. They work along Chris Pratt, and Jennifer Lawrence. They're great. But and it's a storyline that is at least I could follow along and understand what's going on, and makes sense from the point they go to point. But yeah, there are a lot of conveniences, plot conveniences and whatnot, and just the way this relationship happens. It kind of drags it down. So, but this is a movie that I can still sit through. Right, I wasn't questioning. Oh yeah, why is this movie bad? I was like, yeah, it's there, but I feel like some things just could have been done better, and other things were just also pretty problematic. But not a terrible movie per se. Would I recommend it? Yeah, I think I could say like yeah, this is a movie that can be watched. It's just that it's or maybe it. I'm thinking like
Oh, someone's conflicted.
yeah, I don't know. Like I'm thinking of the people who ask me for recommendation. Like, well, should I watch it? I'm like, it's not a terrible movie, but it's not like the greatest movie. Mm,
Yeah.
maybe a 6 actually.
Okay.
I
That's fair.
yeah, I think maybe a 6 because I feel like I don't know, like it's not something that's like yeah, you should go watch it and then you should like take a look and there's some things that I had issues with. So yeah, okay, I'm changing it from 7 to 6. I'll give it a 6.
Okay. Yeah. Um, I would give it a 7. So we're going to match. And the reason I give it a 7 is because I actually would recommend this film, but at the same time, there's like a lot of flaws with it, and I think it could have been a lot better. So I'm literally giving it the minimum ratings needed for it to be recommended based on our rating scale. The reason I would recommend this film actually is not necessarily for the plot per se, because I think the plot is pretty predictable. It's more of like the thematic, almost like the theme and the morality. Like, oh, it kind of like maybe gets you thinking, like possibly gets you thinking about whether or not like you would do it and
Mm-hmm.
do the same thing that Jim did because of
Yeah.
like the loneliness, even though it is wrong. In the fact that like you are condemning someone else.
Yeah.
You are literally playing God with someone else essentially.
Yeah.
You're condemning someone else to die with you.
Right.
Um, but I do think it's an interesting like sort of like not analysis, but like um what's the word? It's an interesting insight, I guess, into like human nature, in some sense of like,
Oh,
oh yeah, we are social creatures. Like, how much, how long would it take for somebody if they were to do it before they pull the trigger
snap.
on
Yeah.
like, and also like it's visually, I really like the visuals. I do like the acting. But there's just so much with the plot that like it was like one of those films where like like in real time I'm thinking like why is this happening? Like this is so convenient for the plot. Like I would change this, this, and this. Um, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, I would give it a 7. I would recommend it, but not necessarily because it has a good plot, but because it makes you think, or at
Makes
least
it.
it made me think.
Yeah.
Um, so
Okay.
yeah, all right, cool. So 6 and 7. Well, pretty standard ratings. Nothing too shiny or dull, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so we will be back Next week?
Mm.
Yes?
Yeah, for me.
Okay. All right, for me too. I have nothing planned. So we'll be back next week with another film. Um, what that film will be, well, of course, we will decide it off screen. You just have to look on our website to see what the next film will be.
Yes.
And I guess with that, we'll catch you all next time.
Bye.